Chair recognizes Senator the Honourable Duane Sands.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. It really is a privilege to make this contribution on behalf of Her Majesty's loyal opposition, which is constitutionally mandated to defend the interests of the Bahamian people. But before I start, Mr. Vice President, I believe that the Bahamas owes a debt of gratitude to one of its young sons, who last night was drafted number 6 in the NBA, and will be playing with the New Orleans Pelicans, Mr. Buddy Hield from 8 Mile Rock, Grand Bahama. I understand that there are already signs of mass migrations from Miami and LA, as Bahamians now will flock to a new favorite NBA team. Mr. Vice President, in evaluating the performance of their government, Bahamians everywhere assessing the seriousness and sincerity of the deliberation that led to the subtotals and total dollar amounts presented in this budget, have heard lots of talk about numbers, about deficits, about line items, and about heads. And as we scour the numbers from page to page, remember that in virtually every country around the world, budgets are about choices. For many struggling economies, and these are economies like ours, budgets are about difficult, almost painful choices that reflect priorities or the day-to-day realities of the various countries. They reflect the vision, the goals of those that craft the budget. It reflects creativity and, most of all, leadership. The choices made in the allocation of the nation's tax dollars, and that's the people's money, demonstrate that the executive and legislative branch, armed with information that they get from the people, are possessed of insight, concern, and understanding. Effective budgeting demands that the architects are in touch with the real issues of concern to Bahamians. Budgeting is about leadership. Now, a budget that may satisfy Moody's, Standard & Poor's, the IMF, the IDB, which incorporates fiscal discipline, can still be a source of inspiration to a cynical public. A budget has the capacity to bind or to divide. So in trying to make sense of the budget, Mr. Vice President, Bahamians have listened to the various contributions in that other place. And despite weeks of debate and the many presentations intended to convince us that things are better, Bahamians have been left with the ominous and uncomfortable feeling that things are not well. Indeed, there's a feeling, a mood, a cloud, a dark storm cloud that doesn't want to break up and move on. It's like a feeling that's strangling us, that's inescapable. You see, we have a people who've been under siege for so long, who yearn for a brighter day. And it's disappointingly clear, Mr. Vice President, that as a nation we are in deep trouble. And many are wondering if there's any reason to have hope. So no measure of assurances or reassurances, particularly when they come from people who have squandered their credibility, have been able to comfort the troubled hearts and minds of our people. Mr. Vice President, this budget represents, in my estimation, the surrender of hope. It is a signal of surrender, of capitulation. It is an admission of defeat. And people who have listened carefully to the architects of this budget can see a surrender on the fronts that matter most to them. So over and over, or as Bahamians say, over and repeatedly, they've made it, Bahamians have said that the things that matter to them are crime, jobs, and quality of life, education and healthcare, when we talk about quality of life. In 2016, if you present a budget that does not include land reform, energy reform, and economic reform, that does not increase a Bahamian person's access to capital, the public is going to come back to you and say, y'all can't be serious. And that's what they're saying to this government. Mr. Vice President, after listening to the debate that has raged in that other place, ordinary Bahamians only need to ask, are you better off now than you were yesterday, last year, or 4 years ago? Do the traffic lights work? Or is our government seemingly incapable of doing the basic things to show competency? Is the current on? It probably going off directly. Will it be on an hour from now? Or is our national energy infrastructure so outdated and poorly maintained that we lack the basic tools to function? Are we using the renewable, environmentally sound energy tools of a 21st century nation? Are the roads in good shape? Are they raggedy and potholed because we've diverted our resources from projects and developments that will transport us into a new future? Are we satisfied that our children are getting a good education? Or are they getting a barely adequate education? Is the lifeline that ought to be lifting our children as we climb there only for the rich, for the connected, for friends and family? How can we in 2016 accept that a graduation rate of 30% is acceptable in a modern-day Bahamas? Can we honestly believe that the health care we need will be available when we need it? And can we afford it? Or will we have to make obscene choices to decide whether we're going to eat, whether we're going to pay the rent, whether we're going to pay the mortgage, clothe our families, or are we going to mortgage our retirement? Bahamians are asking, will the bank take my home? Does anyone really care? And most importantly, Mr. Vice President, is it safe on our streets? Is it safe in our home? Will mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, little girls and little boys continue to cry as the blood flows in the streets? Why can't we get it that no amount of finger pointing, pontificating, or posturing is going to fix this? More than anything else, Mr. Vice President, Bahamians want to feel safe. I am convinced that the answers to these questions, and I remind you that the year is 2016, provide to our people a snapshot of the leadership or stewardship of those on the other side. But I realize it's a reflection also of us and who we are as a people and what we have become. Are we going to be able to move forward together? Mr. Vice President, this year the Prime Minister opened his communication on the budget saying that there had been a reduction in the government's GFS deficit over the first 4 years. Now, in a previous life, I had the privilege of serving as a director of the central bank. Now, if anybody is interested, I would refer them to the central bank annual report, and you can go to page 7. Table 7 on page 33. And there you will find the facts. The Right Honourable Prime Minister said that this budget communication continues our national track record in this regard and suggested that there was evidence of fiscal discipline. At the end of the debate, in closing, our Prime Minister spoke passionately, and he seemed almost offended that the side opposite would question his comments. Well, we and the people of the Bahamas remain unconvinced. In Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 2, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, the gentleman doth protest too much, methinks, because the numbers tell a different story. And we know that after reviewing the budget in detail, that what he told us was inconsistent with the facts, or at least inconsistent with the facts, with all the facts, or the facts that he wanted us to ignore. You see, the Prime Minister spoke consistently about projections. Indeed, if we look only at projections, much of what he said was true. But let's go back and now look at not projections, but actual numbers, and we'll compare the two. Let us compare the numbers given by the Right Honourable Prime Minister in 2012, 2013, all the way up, and then compare what the actual results were. In fiscal year 2012, in the budget communication, the Right Honourable Prime Minister Perry Gladstone Christie projected a GFS deficit of $550 million. Now, they would like to say, the side opposite, that that was an FNM budget. The election was in May of 2012. The actual GFS budget deficit was $546 million, so pretty close. In 2013, the budget communication, the Prime Minister said that the projected GFS deficit would be $443 million. It was actually $480 million. He was off by $37 million. The following year, he predicted $286 million. It was actually $382 million. He was off by $96 million. 2015, 2016, they predicted $141 million. Thus far, $242,800,000. Off, as of today's date, by $101 million. The cumulative miscalculation between the projected GFS deficit and the actual verified numbers from the Central Bank of the Bahamas, a whopping
And please continue, Honourable Member.
the cumulative miscalculation, a whopping $230 million. This shows, Madam President, that this government has been wrong on every single deficit projection since they've come to office. The Bahamian people want to know, was this accidental or deliberate? And with an anemic economy, with real growth rates that are at best barely noticeable, or the worst negative, what is clear is that the deficits, the red ink remains, and the debt has reached historic levels. Last year, we had negative GDP adjusted growth, minus 1.77%. And it's anticipated that we will have, at best, less than 1% growth. In the history of the Bahamas, Madam President, and that's 524 years, of the actual recorded GFS deficits, the highest was $556 million in 2012, a PLP F&M mixed year. The second highest was in 2013, that's $480 million. That's this term. The third highest was 2009, the year after the Great Recession, $403 million, the previous administration. The fourth highest in 524 years was in 2014, 2015, $382 million. 3 out of the last 4 and 3 of the highest GFS deficits in the history of the Bahamas in 524 years has been recorded in this administration. These are not projections, Madam President. These are actual verified numbers. I now turn my attention to the national debt. The central bank's annual report also shows that the Bahamas' national debt has increased from $5.003 billion at the year-end 2012 to $6.6 billion at end of December 2015, a rise of some $1.635 billion in just 3 years under this Christie administration. The national debt from 2007 rose from $3.07 billion to $4.99 billion. Thus far, from 2012 to 2015, the debt went from 4.99 to 6.6. What I am saying, Madam President, And what the Bahamian people realize is that we are in a debt crisis. This administration has been on a 4-year spending and borrowing binge. And if I can borrow a line from the current Deputy Prime Minister, spending money like drunken sailors. Up to December 2015, they borrowed $590 million more than the previous administration did in the entire 5 years. $590 million with one more year to go, more than was borrowed in the entire 5 years. And Madam President, you may recall that in 2008, 2009, the world experienced one of the worst economic downturns in 100 years. Today, the debt stands, and I refer you to page 33 of the Central Bank report, 2015, Table 7. The debt to GDP of the Bahamas stands at 76.3%. Madam President, we have plunged over the cliff, and we're headed onto the rocks. The Bahamas under Perry Gladstone Christie, the Right Honourable Perry Gladstone Christie, is in a debt crisis. And in order to get out of this mess, we're going to require leadership, vision, prudence, transparency, and accountability. And these are all skills not possessed by this administration. I think, Madam President, that what we need is to stop the reckless borrowing and end the addiction to wasteful spending that is threatening to drive this country into insolvency. The senator that spoke previously alluded to the various countries like Greece, Venezuela, who did not learn that lesson. Bahamians have been asking our government to explain what happened to the VAT money, even as they've watched the national debt climb to unprecedented levels. Since coming to office, this administration has increased the national debt to $6.6 billion. That is $18,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. Now that is unthinkable, and that is unbelievable. I turn now, Madam President, to unemployment. The Right Honourable Prime Minister continues to paint a rosy picture about the economic outlook for Bahamians. And he continues to talk about hundreds, thousands of jobs that are coming on stream. Interestingly, we have not seen the May 2016 report. Is that coincidental? The national unemployment rate rose on this government's watch from 12% in May 2015 to 14.8% in November 2015. That equates to 31,375 unemployed Bahamians, 17,000 women